The first time I saw the thing watching me from the vending machine's reflection, I thought I was losing my mind. The second time, it smiled. The glass warped as if something inside it had shifted. Not my reflection, but a version of me that shouldn't exist. My own face stared back, but the eyes were hollow, the mouth stretched just a little too wide. It didn't blink. It just watched. I whirled around. Nothing was there. Just the empty hallway, stretching too long under the flickering fluorescent lights. But my reflection? It was still grinning. I work the night shift at Red Bull headquarters, and if you think that means I sit around drinking energy drinks and filing reports, you're wrong. This place is haunted. Not by ghosts. Ghosts would be easier to understand. No, something else lives in this building at night. Something that shouldn't exist. And the company knows. That's why we have rules. Before my first shift, a man named Darius Quinn, tall, gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes, shoved a crumpled piece of paper into my hand. He looked at me like a man who had seen something he wasn't supposed to. "Memorize these," he muttered, "or you won't make it to morning." I almost laughed, until I saw his hands shaking. I unfolded the paper, my fingers brushing against what felt like dried sweat stains. 5 short sentences, written in bold, frantic strokes. The 5 rules. Rule number 1, if you hear a knock on the break room door after midnight, do not open it. It's already inside the room. Rule number 2, do not drink any Red Bull after 2:13 a.m., no matter how tired you are. Rule 3, if you see an exact copy of yourself anywhere in the building, walk away. Do not make eye contact. Rule number 4, at 3 a.m., all security cameras will turn off for exactly 1 minute. Stay where you are. Do not move, no matter what you hear. Rule number 5, if you find yourself in a hallway that wasn't there before, run. I let out a nervous chuckle. You're messing with me, right? Darius didn't smile. He just took a long, slow breath. Break even one, and you won't live to regret it. Then he walked off, leaving me alone in the too quiet office. I still thought it was a joke, until my first night. It started small, a flicker in the overhead lights, a hum from the vending machines that felt too low, too deep, a strange static charge in the air, like the whole building was holding its breath. Then, at 11:59 p.m., I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. The break room door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I turned my chair just slightly, just enough to see the door from the corner of my eye. It was closed, locked. But under the door, a shadow, thin, motionless, waiting. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to breathe. Darius's first rule: if you hear a knock on the break room door after midnight, do not open it. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering. My brain screamed at me to move, to run, to do something. But then the knob twisted. The door didn't open, but something on the other side wanted it to. Click, click, click. The metal rattled as if someone or something was testing the lock. I gritted my teeth, forcing my body to stay still. Then, the whisper, right against the door. "I know you're in there." The voice wasn't right. It was too flat, too calm, like someone speaking in reverse. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would go away. A long silence. Then, footsteps, slow, dragging movements fading down the hallway. I didn't dare turn around, not until I was sure. The clock on my computer read 12:03 a.m. I had followed the first rule. I was safe, or so I thought. At 2:13 a.m., I yawned, rubbing my eyes. The exhaustion was hitting hard. I needed caffeine. My hands drifted to the can of Red Bull on my desk, unopened, ice cold, tempting. Then I remembered. Rule number 2, do not drink any Red Bull after 2:13 a.m. Why? The note didn't say. Maybe it was some weird office prank. Maybe they just didn't want employees jittery at night. But then I saw him. A man standing at the far end of the hallway, just beyond the vending machines. No, not a man, me. Every nerve in my body locked up. It was me. Same clothes, same posture, same sleep-deprived stare. He stood perfectly still, watching me. My stomach twisted into ice. Rule number 3, if you see an exact copy of yourself anywhere in the building, walk away. Do not make eye contact. Slowly, carefully, I turned my chair away. But in the vending machine's reflection, it was still looking at me. And then it smiled. Not a normal smile, not a human one. Its lips stretched too wide, too thin, curling up to its ears. Its teeth, sharp, wrong, too many. I clamped my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. Then it moved. Not a step, not a walk, a glitch. 1 second it was at the end of the hall. The next, it was inches from my reflection. My heart slammed against my ribs. My breathing turned shallow. It tilted its head. And then, in a voice that sounded exactly like mine, it whispered, "You're not supposed to be here." I bolted from my chair, ran. The hallways stretched, warped. The walls seemed to breathe. The vending machines buzzed louder, flickering in and out of existence. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just needed to get away. Then, the cameras went out. Every single monitor in the office went black. 3 a.m. The fourth rule. At 3 a.m., all security cameras will turn off for exactly 1 minute. Stay where you are. Do not move, no matter what you hear. I skidded to a stop, my chest heaving. My body screamed to keep running, but my brain screamed louder. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not from in front of me, not from behind me, from everywhere. Hundreds of them, moving fast. And then, right next to my ear, a breath. "Found you." I squeezed my eyes shut, didn't move. The cameras flicked back on. The footsteps stopped. The air around me shifted. I opened my eyes. I was alone. But on the security monitor nearest to me, a distorted figure stood at my desk. It looked just like me, and it was still smiling. Still had my posture, but the way it stood was wrong. Too rigid, too unnatural. It stared directly into the camera, smiling, wide, stretched, unmoving. And then it turned, not just on the screen. The break room door creaked behind me. My breath hitched. The air grew thick, suffocating. The vending machines let out a low, static hum, their lights flickering erratically. I felt the shift before I heard it, a presence behind me watching. Close, too close. And then, knock. A soft, deliberate tap against the break room door. Knock. The sound crawled up my spine, freezing my limbs in place. My mind screamed at me to run, to do something, anything, but I couldn't move. Knock, knock, knock. I had followed every rule. I hadn't opened the door earlier. I hadn't looked at my reflection's face. So why was it knocking now? I turned my head, just slightly, just enough to catch the edge of the break room door in my periphery. Something was standing on the other side, a shadow, unmoving, pressed against the frosted glass window. Not a person, not quite. The shape was wrong. Too tall, too thin, its limbs stretching down the doorframe like they had melted. A breath, soft, slow, right behind me. I spun around, nothing. But the door handle, it turned. My stomach twisted into a knot. My hands clenched into fists so tight my nails dug into my palms. Rule number 1. If you hear a knock on the break room door after midnight, do not open it. It's already inside the room. A slow, rasping inhale filled the silence. Not from the other side of the door, from behind me. It was in the room. The light above me flickered once, then cut out completely. I was plunged into absolute darkness. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The vending machines let out an eerie electronic whine. The air grew thick, charged with something unnatural. And then, in the pitch-black silence, the sound of nails scraping across the floor. Closer. I tried to move, but my body locked up. Every muscle in me screamed to run, to get out, but I couldn't. I wasn't in control anymore. A voice, low, distorted, not human, spoke from the darkness. "You shouldn't be here." The lights flickered back on. Nothing was there, but something had changed. The break room felt wrong, stretched, warped. The vending machines were in the wrong place, the chairs slightly askew. It was like stepping into a different version of the room. And then I saw it. The window. A set of fingerprints smeared across the inside of the glass. Long, unnatural, clawed. My stomach turned to ice. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of it. Something had been in here with me. It had touched the glass. I backed away, trying to steady my breathing. I needed to leave. The break room clock read 12:13 a.m. I reached for my phone, hands trembling as I fumbled to unlock it. Maybe I could text Darius? Maybe I could? The screen wouldn't turn on. Dead. I swore under my breath. It was fine earlier. I had charged it before my shift. And then, a sound. A whisper, low and distant, coming from the vending machines. I turned, slow and stiff, dread curling in my stomach. The machine's glass surface reflected the room perfectly, except for one thing. The reflection wasn't mine. It was still smiling. And this time, it raised a hand and knocked on the inside of the glass. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. The vending machine lights flickered. The reflection tilted its head, watching me. And then, the break room door swung open. A gust of ice-cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of something rotten. My chest seized. The hallway outside was pitch black, the overhead lights completely dead. Something stood just beyond the threshold. I couldn't see it, not fully, But the shape was there, tall, motionless. And then it stepped forward. No, not stepped. It glided, like it wasn't walking but being pulled toward me. Every hair on my body stood on end. My vision blurred at the edges. Then the lights came back. The hallway was empty. The vending machine was normal. The fingerprints were gone. But my reflection, it wasn't smiling anymore. It was watching. And as I turned away, I swear it blinked. Something inside me knew I wasn't alone anymore. Not really. I don't remember sitting down. Don't remember my legs carrying me back to my desk. But somehow, I was there. My hands trembled. My breathing came in shallow gasps. The break room, the knocking, the vending machine, none of it made sense. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining things, that exhaustion was making me see things that weren't there. But I knew better. The rules were real. The Red Bull on my desk caught my eye. Cold, unopened. A reminder of something normal in this nightmare of a shift. I grabbed the can, fingers shaking, and checked the time on my monitor. 2:10 a.m. My body felt heavy, leaden. The night shift was catching up with me, exhaustion settling into my bones. Just a few sips, I thought. Just enough to shake the fatigue. Then I remembered rule number 2. Do not drink Red Bull after 2:13 a.m., no matter how tired you are. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. What could possibly happen? The other rules had made some twisted sense. The knocking, horrifying. The reflection, impossible. The strange presence in the break room, undeniable. But this, it was just an energy drink. My fingers curled around the tab. 2:12 a.m. I hesitated. The seconds crawled by, stretching in a way that made my skin crawl. The office was silent, too silent. The vents had stopped humming. The distant clatter of the ice machine had ceased. Even the city outside, no car horns, no sirens, nothing. I could hear my own heartbeat. I swallowed. My throat was dry. My head was spinning. My exhaustion won. The Red Bull hissed as I cracked it open. The sound split through the silence like a scream. I lifted it to my lips. Then I saw it. The monitor in front of me flickered, distorting the reflection on its dark screen. The shape wasn't mine. A dark, oily figure. Its limbs were too long, its fingers too thin. Its hollow, hungry eyes stared at me through the screen. It stood directly behind my chair. I couldn't breathe. The Red Bull slipped from my fingers, hitting the desk with a metallic thunk before toppling over, spilling onto my keyboard. The shape moved, not in the reflection, in the room. The air shifted, wet, slithering noises filling the space around me. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't. Then in the monitor, my reflection smiled, but my real face hadn't moved. My lungs locked. I slammed my laptop shut so hard the entire desk shuddered. The screen cut to black. The air shifted. The oily figure was gone. But the Red Bull, the can was empty. I hadn't taken a sip. I hadn't touched it. My body went ice cold. I shoved my chair back, heart hammering, my eyes darting around the room. Nothing. No movement. No shadows. But I felt it. Something was still here. And then I heard it. A sound so subtle, so sickening that my stomach twisted itself into knots. A gulp, wet, sloppy, coming from under my desk. I didn't move. I couldn't. My hands dug into the armrests, nails biting into the fabric. My ears strained, listening, waiting. Another gulp. Louder. Closer. My breath hitched in my throat. My entire body screamed for me to run, but I couldn't make a sound, couldn't force myself to move. And then, from beneath the desk, a whisper, low, distorted, not human. You're not supposed to drink after 2:13. My vision blurred at the edges. I hadn't drunk it. I knew I hadn't. But the voice, it was amused. It knew something I didn't. Then, a hand reached out from under the desk. Not a human hand. Long, skeletal fingers, slick with something dark and dripping, curled around the edge of my chair. The nails, jagged, broken, stained black. I choked on a scream and kicked backward, toppling out of my chair. My head smacked against the floor, pain exploding behind my eyes. The chair rolled back, revealing nothing. The space under my desk was empty, but the Red Bull can, it was still draining. Something unseen, something I couldn't see, was still drinking from it. I scrambled to my feet, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. My fingers fumbled to grab the can, ice cold but light. I turned it over. Thick, black sludge dripped from the opening. Not Red Bull, not anything I'd ever seen before. I gagged, dropping the can, my body shaking so violently I could barely stand. The air was thick, charged with something I didn't understand. Then, from behind me, a soft exhale, the kind of sound someone makes when they're standing right behind you. I turned, too slow, a hand slammed over my mouth. Not real, Not flesh. It was cold, wet, seeping into my skin. The voice slithered into my ear, a breath that wasn't human. "You drank it," I thrashed, shoving myself backward, the touch vanishing into thin air. I stumbled into my desk, knocking my lamp to the ground. The room was empty, but something was inside me. I could feel it. Something thick, something unnatural, curling in my veins, pulsing beneath my skin. I clutched my stomach, dizziness crashing into me like a wave. My vision warped at the edges, the walls stretching, the ceiling twisting. I tried to move, but my body didn't respond. I wasn't in control anymore. And as I looked back at the black sludge oozing from the Red Bull can, I understood. Something else had drunk it. And now, it was drinking me. I felt it slithering inside, coiling through my veins, thick and wrong. My stomach lurched, my muscles tensed, but I couldn't move. The office around me warped. The fluorescent lights overhead pulsed as if the whole room were breathing. My own breath came in ragged gasps, too fast, too shallow. Something had changed. Then, the lights went out. The office plunged into absolute darkness, thick and suffocating, swallowing every corner, every shadow. My heart stopped. 3 a.m. I knew the rule. Rule number 4, do not move, no matter what you hear. I clenched the desk with white-knuckled fingers, every muscle screaming to run. But I didn't. I couldn't. The air turned rancid, thick with something rotten, something decayed. It pressed against my skin, slithered into my nostrils, curled around my throat. The office wasn't empty anymore. Then, from the blackness, whispers. Not one voice, many. They seeped from the walls, the ceiling, the floor, sliding into my ears like oil. Some were sharp and guttural, others wet and ragged, scraping over each other in a chorus of things that weren't human. They knew my name. A voice behind me, too close, murmured, "He drank it." Another from the vents rasped, "He belongs to us now." A third, right beside my ear, soft and cold, laughed. My fingers dug into the wood of the desk, nails bending, splintering. My lungs screamed for air, but the room wasn't safe to breathe anymore. The shadows moved. They curled around my chair, coiled over the floor. Then something exhaled against my ear, a slow, deliberate breath. Not human, not warm. Something stood directly behind me. I felt it lean in, close enough that I swore I could feel its teeth inches from my skin. "Don't look up," it whispered. The voice was wrong, like it had been stitched together from different mouths, from different throats, rasping and gurgling and grinning all at once. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, to fight, to do anything but sit there. But I forced my muscles to lock in place. Do not move. The thing didn't like that. The whispers twisted into something else, laughter. A low, dead chuckle that spread across the room, as if the walls themselves were amused. It dragged over my skin, slow and deliberate, curling inside my ears, filling my skull like poison. Then a single finger slid down the back of my neck. Ice flooded my veins. I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth would crack. The finger trailed lower, pressing into my spine. Slow, searching. Then it stopped. For a moment, nothing. Silence, stillness. Then, something grabbed my shoulder. I nearly screamed, but I didn't move. The grip tightened, impossibly strong, fingers pressing into my skin, ice cold and wet, soaking through my shirt. My pulse pounded so hard I thought my ribs would crack under the pressure. The whispers stopped. The darkness breathed. The thing behind me laughed again. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The hand vanished. The pressure lifted. The voices faded into nothing. The security monitors flickered back on. A weak, flickering glow illuminated the office. The vents hummed. The air conditioning kicked in with a low, familiar whir. The world snapped back to normal. 3:01 a.m. I exhaled a shaky breath. My hands trembled as I reached up, touching my shoulder, the spot where the thing had grabbed me. My blood turned to ice. There, smeared across my sleeve, a long black handprint. It wasn't ink. It wasn't dirt. It was something else. Something slick and pulsing and still wet. A nauseating shudder crawled down my spine. I forced myself to move, to breathe, to think, but my thoughts weren't my own anymore. I felt wrong. Stretched thin, like something inside me had shifted, like I was losing pieces of myself. Then, a notification popped up on my monitor. I stared at it, a live feed from the security cameras. My stomach dropped. The office was empty, the hallways empty, the break room empty. But something wasn't right. In the footage, my chair was turned away from the desk. I hadn't moved it. My breath hitched, my pulse thundered. Then, in the reflection of the break room window, I saw it. A figure, standing perfectly still, watching me, not in the office, inside the monitor. My reflection was still sitting in the chair, but I wasn't. And then it smiled. A cold, twisting terror took hold of me. My entire body locked in place as I stared at the thing wearing my face. It grinned through the screen, its eyes vacant, hollow, as if they weren't meant to hold human expression. Then it moved. Not in the reflection, not in the monitor, in the office. The chair behind me creaked. My breath hitched. I didn't turn around. I ran. I didn't care about the rules anymore. I didn't care what happened next. My body moved on instinct, my legs pushing me forward before my brain even registered the motion. The walls blurred past me, the air thick and suffocating, buzzing with something unseen. I reached the doorway and stopped. Something was wrong. The office layout had changed. My stomach lurched as I stared at the impossibility before me. Where the hallway to the break room should have been, there was now something else. A long, dimly lit corridor, stretching endlessly in both directions. That hallway wasn't there before. Rule number 5, if you find yourself in a hallway that wasn't there before, run. But I couldn't. The air was wrong. Thick, damp, alive. The floor beneath me felt softer than it should, almost like stepping on muscle, on something breathing. My pulse pounded, my body screaming at me to move, but my feet stayed rooted in place. Then from the darkness ahead, a sound, a slow, deliberate scraping, claws on tile. My breath came in short, shallow bursts, each one harder to take than the last. Then a voice. Low, distorted, familiar. You shouldn't be here. A shape shifted within the shadows ahead. Someone stepped forward. Me. I stared at myself, my heart hammering so violently I thought my ribs might snap. It was me, down to the smallest detail. My clothes, my posture, the slight twitch in my fingers I hadn't even noticed before. But the smile, that wasn't mine. It stretched wider than a human mouth should, curving up at the edges in an unnatural, sickening way. Its teeth were wrong, too sharp, too clean, too white. I turned to run, but the hallway was behind me now. It stretched in both directions, endlessly. The air smelled of rot and blood. My double took a slow step forward, its head tilted. The grin never faltered. And then it opened its mouth. Wider than humanly possible. A deep, black void stretched inside its mouth, a pit with no throat, no tongue, no end. The skin around its lips split as it widened, wet and glistening, but no blood came. Then it started screaming. The sound was impossible. Not a voice, not a person. It was metal scraping against metal, bones snapping, children laughing, static, shrieking, sobbing, all at once. The walls around me vibrated with the force of it, the floor quaking beneath my feet. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't just around me, it was inside me. It rattled in my skull, burrowing deep into my brain, sinking into my ribs like invisible fingers pulling me apart. I stumbled back, but there was nowhere to go. The hallway shifted. The walls pulsed, expanded, contracted, like lungs, like something was breathing me in. My doppelganger stepped closer. The scream stopped. The silence was worse. It stared at me, waiting. Then, it took another step, and another, and then it ran. I bolted. I didn't know where I was running, only that I had to. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but the thing behind me was faster. The walls closed in, the ceiling lowered, the hallway was folding in on itself. I reached for anything, a door, a corner, an escape. Nothing, only endless hallway. My footsteps pounded against the floor, the sound merging with the wet, slapping echoes of the thing chasing me. Closer, closer. I could feel it reaching for me. And then I saw it, a door. At the very end of the corridor, I lunged. My fingers closed around the handle and I yanked. The door burst open and I tumbled through. I hit the floor hard, my knees slamming against the tile, cold, office tile. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I gasped, sucking in air like I had been drowning. The hallway, gone. I turned and froze. The door was still there, but something was knocking, slow, deliberate. Then a voice. My voice. Let me in. I stumbled back, my body trembling so violently I thought my bones might snap. I wasn't safe. It was still here, and it wanted in. The knock came again, louder, more insistent. Then, my voice. Let me in. I stumbled back, my entire body trembling so hard I thought I might collapse. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, my lungs struggling to pull in air that felt suddenly too thick. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, the buzzing sound growing sharper, digging into my skull. The knock became a pounding. Faster, harder, like whatever was on the other side was done waiting. I clamped a hand over my mouth, my pulse hammering in my ears. My own voice mocked me from behind the door. "Let me in. You're not supposed to be here alone." A slow, sickening realization crawled up my spine. It didn't just want to get inside the office. It wanted to get inside me. The door handle twisted. I couldn't move. A sharp, ear-piercing screech tore through the room as the metal knob rattled violently, shaking so hard I thought it might snap off. The air around me shifted, wrong, like the room itself was holding its breath. Then, silence. The door didn't open, but I knew it wasn't over. I forced myself to move, my muscles screaming in protest. I had to go. I had to leave before it found another way in. But as I turned, I wasn't alone. A shape stood in the reflection of the vending machine, not behind me, not beside me. Inside the glass, my own face stared back at me, but it wasn't a reflection. It blinked a second too late. Then it grinned, the same wrong, wide, skin-splitting grin. My stomach dropped. I took a step back. The vending machine screen flickered, the reflection distorting, then warping. The face shifted, the eyes turned black, the mouth opened. A voice crawled from inside the glass, a whisper that wasn't mine. "You're already too late." The lights flickered violently. The vending machine glass cracked. And then it lunged. I barely had time to react before the glass exploded outward. Shards sliced past me, embedding into the walls, the floor. I threw my arms up, shielding my face as the vending machine shattered apart, the impact sending me stumbling backward. The sound was deafening, an eruption of breaking glass, the mechanical crunch of the machine's insides tearing apart. And then, silence. I lowered my arms, my breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. The vending machine was destroyed, but the reflection was gone. I scanned the room, every nerve in my body screaming that something was still here. The air was wrong, heavy, watching. Then, a whisper, right against my ear. "Run." The lights cut out. Total darkness swallowed the room. My breath hitched. Then, a hand closed around my wrist. Ice cold, tight. I screamed. I yanked away, stumbling back, crashing into the desk. My knee slammed against the corner, a sharp burst of pain shooting up my leg. But I didn't care. I had to move. A presence loomed in the dark, a shadow against the deeper void. And then, it moved. Fast. Too fast. Something whispered. The same voice. Mine. "Why are you running?" The lights flickered back on. I was alone. The office was silent. The air still felt wrong. And then, I saw it. The bruise on my wrist, a dark hand-shaped mark burned into my skin. I stared at it, my stomach twisting, bile rising in my throat. Something had touched me, and it had let me go. For now. But as I turned, my pulse still hammering, a cold realization crashed over me. The security cameras were on, the feed was playing, and on the screen, I saw myself, standing completely still, not moving, not breathing, just smiling. I collapsed into my chair, trying to slow my breathing. My heart slammed against my ribs. I needed to leave. That's when the phone rang. The old office landline, but no one uses it. I stared at it, my pulse hammering. Then, against every instinct screaming at me, I picked it up. Silence. Then static. Faint, distant breathing crackled through the receiver. Then a voice. My voice. "You broke the rules." I slammed the phone down, my hands shaking. But the moment I did, a knock. Slow. Deliberate. I turned. The break room door. The same knock as before. A shadow under the door. Tall. Unmoving. Waiting. I squeezed my eyes shut. It was inside the room, just like the rules said. But then, the doorknob turned. The metal rattled, the sound sharp and wrong in the dead silence of the office. My body locked up, every muscle rigid with a terror so deep it felt like my bones might crack under it. The shadow beneath the door shifted, stretching, warping. Too tall, too thin. It pressed closer. I could hear it breathing now, a ragged, wet inhale. Then, exhale. The doorknob twisted further. I grabbed the nearest object, a stapler, as if that could do anything. My hands trembled as I held it up like a useless shield. The door groaned as it slowly began to open. No, 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 no. I lunged forward, slamming it shut with my entire body weight. The impact sent a shock through my bones, but I didn't care. My hands pressed flat against the wood, my breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. Then, pressure. Something was pressing back, a slow, deliberate push from the other side. It wasn't a person. I knew that. I could feel it. The way the air around the door felt thicker, heavier, colder, like something was reaching through, trying to pull me into whatever was on the other side. The breathing continued, closer now, almost against the door. My own breath hitched, my chest seizing as the temperature dropped. The walls seemed to pulse. the fluorescent lights flickering erratically. Then, a whisper, right against the door. "You're not supposed to be here alone." I choked back a whimper, my body frozen in place. Then, silence. The weight against the door lifted. The air shifted. It was gone. I didn't move for a full minute, my hands still pressed against the door, my mind trying to process what had just happened. My whole body was slick with sweat, my pulse erratic. Then, finally, I took a step back, my knees shaking. The moment I did, the phone rang again. A shrill, piercing sound that made my skin crawl. My eyes snapped to the desk. No, I wasn't answering it. Not this time. But it kept ringing. Louder. Faster. The air grew thick again. The walls seemed closer. Ring. The sound drilled into my skull, my own breath sinking with its erratic pace. My hands clenched into fists. Then the voicemail clicked on. I didn't touch it. I swear to God, I didn't. But the machine played anyway. Static. Then a voice. Low. Distorted. Familiar. Not just familiar, mine. "Don't turn around." I stopped breathing. I felt it before I saw it. A presence behind me. Standing. Waiting. I wanted to scream, to bolt for the door, but my body refused to move. My lungs burned, my vision blurred at the edges. A slow, creeping terror seeped into every inch of me. Then, something brushed the back of my neck. Cold, too cold, like fingers. I swallowed hard, my throat tight and dry. Then, another whisper. "You should have followed the rules." I ran. I didn't care where, I just ran. My feet pounded against the tile, my pulse roaring in my ears. I didn't stop until I reached the front doors, my hands fumbling with the lock. They wouldn't budge. No, I yanked, pulled, slammed my fist against the glass. The reflection in the door shifted. Not a perfect reflection, it blinked too late. Then, it smiled, my entire body locked up, my breath shattering in my chest. It tilted its head, then it lifted a hand. Not to wave, to knock, from the inside. I staggered back, shaking so violently I could barely stand. My reflection wasn't mine. It stood there, grinning, pressing its palm flat against the glass. Then in the reflection, my phone rang again. But I wasn't holding it. I turned slowly. The office phone was still on the desk, the caller ID glowing. No number, just 2 words. "Answer it." I took a step back, my chest tight with panic. But the voicemail clicked on again, before I could even react. This time, I didn't hear static, I heard breathing. Then a voice I hadn't heard in years, a voice that shouldn't exist because the person who it belonged to was dead. My brother. He died when I was 10, but now in that cold, suffocating silence, I heard him. "It's not me." My stomach dropped. Then a third knock. Louder. Right behind me. I held my breath. The doorknob twisted slowly. Click. The door creaked open, an inch, then 2. Something stood just beyond the threshold, shrouded in darkness. Not human. Its breath was wrong, wet, rattling, hollow. I wanted to run, but the security cameras were about to go out again. 3 a.m., and I remembered the rule. Do not move. The lights flickered. The cameras shut down. Total darkness. Then, inches from my face, something moved. A breath brushed my skin. A voice, distorted, unnatural. "You don't belong here." A cold, bony hand grazed my shoulder. My body locked up in terror. The security feed snapped back on. I was alone, but the break room door, wide open. And just beyond it, the hallway stretched too far, too wrong, like it was waiting for me. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in slow, unnatural pulses. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered, casting warped shadows that moved when they shouldn't. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, my nails digging into my palms. I knew better than to step forward. I knew better than to look too long. But the hallway wasn't supposed to be this long. The familiar rows of shelves, the storage closets, the back exit, they were gone. Instead, the corridor stretched into something endless, shifting, as if the building itself had bent and twisted into a shape it was never meant to take. My legs felt like lead, my breath shallow and tight in my chest. Then, a sound. Footsteps, soft at first, distant. But they grew louder, closer. The steady, deliberate echo of bare feet slapping against the floor. Not running, just walking, like something knew I was here, knew I had seen too much. And now, it was coming for me. I forced myself to back away, inch by inch. My own breath sounded deafening in the silence. The footsteps didn't stop. They only grew heavier, faster. Then, the smell. Rot, thick, wet, suffocating, like something had been left to decay just out of sight. My stomach churned. The taste of bile burned the back of my throat. And then, it stepped into view. At first, it was just a shadow, a mass of darkness at the end of the warped hallway. But as the lights flickered again, I saw flesh stretched too tight over jagged, unnatural bones. Its limbs were wrong, too long, too thin, its mouth too wide. It didn't blink, it didn't breathe, but it smiled. Then it took a step forward, and the hallway snapped back to normal. Everything, the shelves, the storage closets, the exit door, back where they should have been. Except now, the break room door was completely open, and standing inside, where there should have been nothing but an empty room, was a figure. Not the thing from the hallway. Something else. Something worse. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was looking at me. I knew because I felt it. A pressure behind my eyes, like it was inside my head, shifting through my thoughts, peeling me apart from the inside. The air thickened. A whisper slithered through the silence. Close your eyes. I couldn't. Not even when I felt something move closer. Not even when the lights overhead dimmed and the shadow in the doorway grew taller. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but my body refused to move. My throat locked up, my legs rooted to the spot. Then, a sudden burst of static, the security feed flickering. The cameras were back. I turned toward the monitors, and there it was. Not just the figure in the break room. Something else. Standing right behind me. Tall, wrong. Its reflection in the monitor was distorted. Its limbs twisting, shifting, as if it wasn't bound to a single shape. But the worst part? Its face was mine. A warped, rotting version of me, and it was smiling. I spun around, nothing there, but I wasn't alone. I knew that now, because something was breathing against my ear, low, raspy. See you soon. And then, the front door unlocked. The chime echoed through the empty store, sharp and metallic. Someone had entered. I whipped my head toward the entrance. At first, I saw nothing, just the glass doors swinging slightly from the force of being opened. The parking lot beyond was empty, the streetlights flickering in the distance. Then, a shape, standing just inside the doorway. A person, or at least it looked like one, but its face was blurred, like staring at a photograph that had been smudged, the features warping, shifting. It didn't move, it didn't speak, but I knew it was looking at me. The silence stretched. Then it stepped forward. The motion was wrong, too smooth, like a film reel skipping frames. I backed away. It took another step. I turned and ran. Past the counter, past the aisles, straight toward the back exit. My feet pounded against the tile, my breath ragged in my chest. But just as I reached for the handle, a hand clamped onto my shoulder. Cold, too cold. My vision blurred, the world tilted, and a voice wet crawling inside my head. You're not supposed to leave. The grip tightened. Then, darkness. And the last thing I heard was the front door chime, ringing one last time. I ran for the exit. I was done. Rules be damned, I was getting out. The hallway twisted as I moved. The walls stretched, the vending machines flickered in and out of existence. And then, finally, the glass doors to the lobby. I shoved them open. Cold night air hit my face. I had made it, but something felt off. The security guard at the front desk wasn't moving. He sat, stiff and still, his face hidden under his cap. Hey, I called, stepping forward. He didn't react. I walked closer. Too close. Then his head snapped up. His eyes were completely white. His mouth twisted into a wide, broken grin. And in my voice, he whispered, "You never left." I spun around. The lobby was gone. I was back in the office. The exit had never been real. My breath hitched in my throat, my chest tightening with something deeper than fear. Something raw. Something that made my stomach lurch, like I had just stepped off the edge of the world. The fluorescent lights above buzzed erratically, flickering, casting sharp, shifting shadows across the floor. The air smelled stale, dead. The same endless aisles, the same security monitors, the same goddamn break room door, all right where they had been. My fingers trembled as I reached out, pressing my palm against the nearest wall. It was solid, real, but it wasn't supposed to be. I had just felt the cold night air. I had heard the city outside, the distant hum of traffic, the wind rattling against the glass. Hadn't I? A slow, suffocating realization settled over me. I was still inside, and I wasn't alone. From the corner of my eye, I saw something move, a flicker of motion, a shape standing between the aisles, just past the shelves of bottled water and canned goods. Too still. I turned my head, forcing myself to look. Nothing. The aisle was empty, but the security monitors weren't. My gaze snapped to the flickering screens. The lobby, the aisles, the break room, all empty, except for one screen. The camera that watched the front entrance. There was someone standing there, facing the glass doors, their back to the camera. My stomach twisted. The figure wasn't moving. It wasn't shifting or breathing or doing anything at all. Just standing. Then its head turned. Not all the way. Just slightly. Just enough. Even though I couldn't see its face, I felt it looking at me. A slow, wet, creaking noise filled the silence, like old wood bending under weight. I realized with a sickening jolt, it was turning more. Its neck stretched, the angle unnatural, the bones shifting and cracking beneath skin. The movement was too slow, too deliberate, too wrong. And then, the camera feed cut out. The screen went black. A sound, soft, almost imperceptible, rose behind me, breathing right against my ear. I spun around, heart slamming against my ribs, expecting to see something inches from my face. But the store was empty. Except the break room door. It was open again, wider than before. The hallway beyond it was different now. No longer an office corridor, no longer something I could pretend was normal. It stretched too far. The walls weren't walls anymore. They were moving, shifting, writhing, like something beneath the surface was pressing outward. And at the end of that impossible hallway, barely visible in the dim, flickering light, a figure stood, silent, watching me. I took a step back, my pulse hammering. My entire body screamed at me to run, to do anything except move closer. But the lights overhead flickered again, and it was closer. My breath hitched, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, another flicker, closer still. I could see its shape now, see the way it didn't quite belong, its limbs too long, its skin too pale. But the worst part? Its face. Because it wasn't some hollow, eyeless void. It wasn't some twisted, unrecognizable thing. It was mine, not distorted, not decayed, just me, expressionless, emotionless, waiting. Then it spoke, not aloud, not with sound, inside my head. A whisper, crawling beneath my skin. Come back. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred. My legs moved on their own. Step by step, I felt myself being pulled forward. The air grew heavier, pressing against my chest, squeezing my lungs. The hallway stretched further, the walls bending, the ceiling curving like a throat swallowing me whole. The figure, myself, never moved. It didn't have to. I was going to it. I tried to stop, tried to fight, but the closer I got, the more I could hear it. Whispers, low and endless, overlapping each other like voices speaking from behind a wall. They knew my name. They had always known my name. My foot crossed the threshold of the break room. A sudden, sharp sound split the air. The front door chime. Everything froze. For one impossible moment, the pressure lifted. The whispers stopped. The hallway shuddered, the walls twitching like something had been interrupted. And then, I was yanked backward. A force, something strong, something real, grabbed the collar of my uniform and ripped me away. I stumbled, crashing onto the floor, gasping for breath as the spell, whatever it was, broke. The break room door slammed shut. The store snapped back to normal. Bright, harsh fluorescent lights, silent aisles, like nothing had ever happened. Except there was someone standing over me. Not the figure, not the thing that wore my face. A man, tall, wearing a dark coat, his expression unreadable, his eyes too knowing. Like he had seen this before, like he had been waiting. Slowly he knelt down, tilting his head slightly. His voice was calm, too calm. You weren't supposed to open that door. A deep, cold realization settled in. This place, it didn't want me to leave. The man in the dark coat was still kneeling in front of me, his expression calm, unreadable, his presence somehow more disturbing than anything I'd seen tonight. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, the weight of everything crushing down on me. The flickering overhead lights, the sound of the refrigerator humming in the break room, the distant rustling from the aisles, it all felt wrong. Offbeat, like I had stepped out of sync with reality, just slightly, just enough to notice that the world around me was no longer solid. He reached out, gripping my wrist with a hand that was too cold. You weren't supposed to open that door, he said again, his voice low, distant, like it was coming from somewhere else. I yanked my arm back. Who the hell are you? My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded smaller. The man didn't answer. He only stood, his dark coat shifting like it was moving on its own, the shadows clinging to him unnaturally. He tilted his head slightly, then took a slow step back, fading into the aisle's shadows. Gone. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering so hard it felt like it was about to burst through my ribs. I turned in every direction, trying to find an exit that was real this time. The front doors? The hallway? The break room? I froze. Someone was standing by my desk. No, not someone. Me. My doppelganger stood perfectly still, its back slightly hunched, its head tilted in an unnatural way, like it wasn't used to standing like a human should. Its face was mine, down to the smallest detail, but its expression was wrong. Empty. Its lips were parted just slightly, as if waiting for something. It took a step forward. I took a step back. It took another. The sound of its footsteps weren't right. Too light, too hollow. A choked noise crawled up my throat. My body screamed at me to move. I turned and ran. The hallways stretched again, the walls shifting, breathing, twisting like they were alive. The vending machines hummed louder, their flickering lights pulsing like they were trying to warn me. But I only saw one thing, the break room door, wide open, waiting. I didn't think, didn't hesitate. I shoved it open. And the second I stepped inside, I knew I had made a mistake. The air was thick, not humid, not warm, but thick, like I had just walked into something that wasn't meant to be touched. The break room was dim. The single overhead light bulb flickered erratically, barely illuminating what was inside. And there, sitting at the table, was Darius Quinn. But Darius Quinn had been missing for 3 months. His uniform was the same. His posture was the same. But his eyes were gone. Hollow sockets stared back at me, gaping holes where his pupils should have been, empty and endless. His mouth twisted into an unnatural grin, the corners of his lips splitting slightly, cracked like old leather. A rasping breath wheezed out of him. "Took you long enough," he said. I couldn't move. I couldn't move. He shouldn't be here. He was dead. Or worse, he was never gone to begin with. A creak. Something behind me. I turned too slow. The door slammed shut. The break room wasn't a room anymore. The walls were stretching, expanding. They weren't smooth anymore. They were covered in something wet, pulsing, like muscle, like skin. The vending machine in the corner started to rattle, the buttons flashing symbols I couldn't read. The hum of the refrigerator grew louder, lower, vibrating in my skull. And the worst part? The window. The window that should have looked into the office. It didn't show the office anymore. It showed me, sitting at my desk, perfectly still, my face blank, my hands folded neatly, like I had never moved at all. I stepped forward, my legs trembling. My reflection moved with me. But outside, the other me didn't. It sat there, staring forward. The longer I looked, the worse the details became. The skin was too smooth, the fingers too long, and the eyes, they weren't mine. They were the same empty, hollow voids that stared at me from Darius Quinn's rotting face. A whisper, close, from behind me. Not a voice, not a sound, but something thinking, something that had always been here. My chest caved in with a breath I hadn't meant to take, my head filling with something I couldn't understand. My body stiffened. The final rule. I heard it inside me. A voice crawling under my skin, curling around my spine, pressing against my skull like hands were gripping my head from the inside. If you break a rule, you take his place. I turned back toward the table. Darius Quinn was standing now, grinning. His mouth had stretched too wide. His skin was peeling at the edges. But I couldn't run anymore, because I knew the truth now. The rules weren't to keep me safe. They were to keep it out, to keep the thing that sat at my desk from replacing me. And now, it had. I looked at my hands. They were fading. I was fading. The light flickered. A sound filled my ears, a slow, rhythmic tapping. The sound of my replacement drumming its fingers on the desk, getting comfortable, settling in, taking over, forever. And me? I was trapped, a shadow in a room that shouldn't exist. A name on a schedule that would never be erased. Another rule waiting to be broken.